Precisa ferir a pressão, medir a glicemia ou tomar uma vacina? Na Drogasil tem exames, testes e calendário vacinal completo. E o que é melhor, tem sempre uma Drogasil aí perto de você. É fácil, prático e rápido. Dá para ir entre uma música e outra. Procure nossos farmacêuticos. Quanto mais você conhece o que a gente faz na Drogasil, mais você se cuida.
We may live over 5,000 miles from Lincoln Financial Field, but what we lack in proximity, we make up for in the film study. And each and every week, we'll be bringing you in-depth film breakdowns from across the pond and the Sooner State. Welcome to On the Shane Page. I am your host, Shane Haff. You can follow me on Twitter at Shane Haff NFL. And I'm joined, as always, by BGN's own film guru, Johnny Page. Give him a follow on Twitter at JohnnyPage9. Johnny, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing very well. We are about to talk about, we're about to talk about my favorite thing, Shane. So off season's always a bit weird. Let's be honest. It's a strange time in the calendar. I'm still watching UDFA tape, which is really sad, and I need to hurry up and finish it. But I'm not there yet, basically, to talk about them. So we will talk about them at some point. So I said to you, what can we sort of talk about? We've got loads of ideas running around our head. And I wanted to talk about running back because I've had quite a few chats with our next guest online in the past 5 or 6 months. Relatively new Twitter follow, actually. I think we've only really discussed for the last few months, but we basically just discussed running backs, and all I like talking about on the show half the time is run game. So we thought we'd sort of combine the two and do a whole episode talking about the future running back position, and yeah, just the way the running back position has evolved over the last few years. So yeah, I'll leave you to introduce our guest, Shane, anyway.
Yeah, but before I do that, just to peek behind the curtain, that's absolutely not what happened. Johnny was like, hey, do you want to do UDFAs next week? And I was like, absolutely not. Let's do something else instead. I am not up for watching UDFA tape yet. So here we arrive.
That is also true, but I haven't finished yet. So you're not the only one being slightly lazy on the film study. I still haven't fully got done yet. So it's not just you.
Absolutely. Well, we are joined by a special guest today, Charles Maranan. You guys give him a follow on Twitter at Chucks Maranan. It is criminal that he's still below 1,000 followers on Twitter. Him and Johnny are your two stops. It can't be a one stop, but if you want to talk anything run game, those are the two guys to go to. So if you're a listener of the podcast here, make sure you go give him a follow if you haven't. Charles, how are you doing today?
I am doing excellent. Thank you guys for having me on. It's an honor. It's a pleasure to be on with you guys.
I am trying to remember back to when we started following each other on Twitter and interacting, because I haven't to the degree that Johnny has, because I watch things outside of running game, and I don't think either of you do, but we've definitely interacted over the years. So it's good to get you on a podcast. And just to introduce yourself a bit to our followers, how did you get into watching film, especially like the focus on running backs? Just talk to me a little bit about how you got to where you are today, especially relating to the run game.
Yeah, absolutely. So back in, I'd say like 2017, before the season started, my friend and I from high school, we started our own podcast on YouTube. Quickly, it was picked up by the company I work for now, A2D Radio. And from then on, like, I've always wanted to increase my knowledge as a fan. Like I'll be transparent. I've never played the game of football, and I only started really loving it back like early 2000s. But I always wanted to increase my knowledge. So around that same time, I was listening to the Kist and Solak podcast, and Kist, I remember he mentioned the Scouting Academy, and I DM'd him on Twitter and said, hey, like, can you give me more info about this? He told me, and I enrolled, and it literally changed the way I view football. And it really helped me in my passion for studying the running back position, because it gave me a great baseline for how to structure the way I do evals. Not even just for running back, for any player, but like it gave me a really good baseline of how I need to go and view the position, view the player. And it just, from then on, I've just been like a sponge trying to soak up all the information and knowledge that I can. And it's been a journey since then. And people ask me like, why running back? That's a good question. Is ever since I was younger, my first memory of football was Barry Sanders. I would on Thanksgiving days I would watch him and the Lions play, and Barry Sanders would be just running like a maniac. I've never seen a guy run like that. So I was like, wow, this guy insane. If I were ever play football, I'd want to run like him. And then it kind of really exploded when I watched Brian Westbrook at Villanova, early 2000s. I was like a huge fan of just the way he played football, did everything. And then when he got drafted by the Eagles, he pretty much cemented himself as like my favorite player. And the way he played the game was just how I always viewed the position to be played. And, I'm wearing a Brian Westbrook shirt right now because, always showing my love for, that's my guy. But like, that's when my love for the position really like exploded. And I really dove into like what a running back does for a football team. And so that's pretty much the background of like where my passion for the running back position came from. And, my background and how I got into film.
All right. You got the Westbrook jersey hanging up there behind you. Brian Westbrook is actually a big part of the reason I became an Eagles fan too. I'm from Oklahoma, never been to Philadelphia before this year when I went up, and people will ask me, were your family like Eagles fans? And they weren't. I just sort of liked players without a team in Oklahoma. And I don't tell people this a lot these days, but the first team I liked was the 49ers way back in the day. But I eventually became an Eagles fan because of Westbrook and Dawkins, and that just sort of stuck long term. So always love hearing the Westbrook shout outs. I was not watching the game at that level back then. I kind of wish I was at times, but
Shane, it's a bit random. I wasn't going to mention it. You didn't ask me about my background, of course, because everyone knows the sort of run game, but I actually don't think I've ever told the story as well. Was like, as an Eagles fan, LaShawn McCoy. We don't really ever talk about LaShawn McCoy. I feel like he's an underrated guy, but I know every Eagles fan knows the game I'm talking about. But I think the Detroit Lions game in the snow, there was something about the way Shady moved that game that I fell in love with the position as well. And there's my favorite quote. I don't know where I read this, and I wish I did. I read this years ago from I can't remember what blog it was, when they said about the running backs basically being undervalued. And they said it's really weird, and we're going to talk about this later on, but they said that running backs touch the ball. Your number one running back will touch the ball more times than your number one wide receiver.
Leach. That's Mike Leach, right?
Was it Mike Leach? And it's weird to think about when you actually think, except for the quarterback, you could argue the running back touches the ball more than anyone else. Yep. Yet people don't talk about them very much still. So that's sort of like the reason why we wanted to do this episode, is that Shane may disagree. He's got his analytics hat on and his contract data, and he's saying they're overpaid, etc. and whatever. But ignoring Shane, I think me and Charles in particular, it feels like the position's become so devalued that there's not enough attention put on it now. And it seems like the Eagles obviously agree with us. So that's a nice little, is that in the business what we call like a teaser? Do you want to then roll through, Shane, to our first question, speaking about the Eagles running backs?
The Leach thing that I'm thinking of is they asked
or just start talking about the Leach.
Yeah, no, I got to talk about the Leach thing.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Leach said that he was talking about how he throws the ball so much and he rarely ran it. And somebody asked him about balance. And he said that some people will say that it's balance to put 4 athletes out on the perimeter and throw it to them half the time and give it to one running back the other half the time. But he thought it was more balanced to give it to every guy equally. So we're going to throw the ball 80% of the time and we'll run it 20%. So Mike Leach, if he were still with us and we're on this podcast, he might be on my side of the fence here in the running back value thing, but that's okay. We'll get into it here. So Charles, I got to ask you, we bring you on the show to talk running backs. We've got to start with the Eagles running back room. So a couple additions this offseason. They bring in Saquon Barkley. Obviously Kenny Gainwell comes back. They go draft Will Shipley. What are your thoughts on the current running back room, kind of your expectations? And if you have like your brief scouting report on Will Shipley, I know Johnny and I have talked about him, but we'd be really interested to hear that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because we did running backs last night and we talked about this very topic too, the current Eagles running back room. And I'm good with it. I don't want to say I'm like, I think it's great, but I think anyone who follows me on Twitter and social media, or any of the followers on A2D, like I have loved Saquon Barkley since before he was drafted. Like he's been one of my favorite prospects that's ever come out, and I've been tweeting free Saquon for ever since the second he was drafted by the Giants. So him coming here has been a dream come true. I love Saquon, and I am thrilled, and I have super high expectations for him. So that goes without saying when it comes to Saquon. Behind him is the big question mark. When it comes to Gainwell, which we'll talk about first because he's the lone returning piece in this running back room. When it comes to Gainwell, I feel like I've always been in the middle. Years ago, most of the fan base was so high on Gainwell, they wanted him to be the lead back over Miles Sanders. I was the one saying, oh, let's pump the brakes. Like, Gainwell is not that type of lead running back guy. He's just not. To me, I see him as a solid complement, like a guy who can do everything, and you want him playing alongside the lead guy or in tandem with someone. Never saw him as a lead person, as a lead runner. This past season comes, and now if you speak to most Eagles fans, they want him off the team or they think he sucks. And I think that's going way too extreme again. I still think Gainwell does a good job of almost everything on the field. He's a solid all-around running back. Do you want him to have a heavy workload? No, you don't. But I like Gainwell there as a reliable piece that I know I can count on if I need something, if I need a few carries, if I need pass protection, if I need a pass catching back for a few plays. Like, he can be there and he'll be reliable. He'll be solid. And you can do much worse than that. When it comes to Will Shipley, I think it's interesting because I don't think the world of Will Shipley either. I think his floor is high, but I think his ceiling is low. I think he's a good all-around athlete, but nothing special. In a way, I guess you can say he's kind of like Gainwell in that sense where he can do a little bit of everything except for pass protection. I think Shipley needs a lot of work in pass protection. But what appealed to me about Shipley in terms of how he wins is, one, I think his vision is one of his better traits as a running back. I think in this draft class, I know people say the draft class was kind of shallow when it came to the running back class, but out of everyone in this class, his vision was one of the better ones. So I like his processing, like his ability to do multiple schemes. So you have that. And as a receiver, he has promise. I wouldn't say he runs a full route tree for when it comes to flexing the running back out as a wide receiver. I think most of his legitimate routes come from the slot. So he provides someone as a slot receiver. I think he needs work on the outside if you're going to flex him outside as a receiver. But it's there. He has good hands, and he knows how to be a receiver out of the backfield and in the slot area. So I think he has that dual threat ability, and he may not be as strong as Gainwell. Contact balance might not be as good, but I think he does have a little bit more burst. I think he's more springy, a little bit more juice than what Gainwell does have. So it's a matter of like, what is your flavor? What are you looking for? I think that if I were to make a prediction, I think Gainwell's going to start off as the backup, to start the season. But I think by season's end, I wouldn't be surprised if Shipley is the backup, is starting to get reps over Gainwell. I wouldn't be surprised. So that's that. And as far as everyone else, you've got Tyrion Davis-Price and you've got Kendall Milton. I tweeted something out yesterday about Kendall Milton. I am intrigued about what he can bring because he offers something that the other running backs in terms of Shipley or Gainwell just don't. He's a big, powerful runner. And people will say, well, he went undrafted. Well, yeah, because most of his career he didn't produce. But 2023, if you compare 2022 to 2023, his tape actually got better. He got stronger. He got quicker. And I feel like the light bulb finally went on for him in 2023. And I think there's something there to work with. I think if he were to hit his ceiling, I think he could be a good complementary guy, early down guy who gets a lot of in between the tackles work, short yardage work, can be a bruiser for you. And we just haven't had that the past few years. So I won't guarantee that he's going to have a contributing role in 2024. It's very possible if he makes the team as the RB4, he's probably the healthy scratch. If he makes a practice squad, he'll be on the practice squad all year. Or maybe he just doesn't stick. But I would hope that the coaching staff gives him or is patient with him so that he can develop. Because I think there's a little bit something there with Kendall Milton. So he's an intriguing guy. Tyrion Davis-Price, I know he has return ability. I'm okay with him. I kind of was. I had if I remember, I had like a 4th round grade on him in that draft. I like his size, and he does have good straight line speed. But other than that, there's nothing that really pops out for me with TDP. So if I were to choose, I would hope that Milton makes it over TDP. So that's how I see the 5 running backs in this running back room right now.
All right. So when we talk about the Eagles getting their 3rd offensive coordinator in the last 3 years and bringing in Kellen Moore, what are your thoughts about how he's going to utilize the running game, how it's going to blend with Stoutland, who's the run game coordinator? I know if you go back and look at Kellen Moore's rushing attacks over the last several years, it oscillates wildly in terms of like neutral down run rate and how successful it was. And I know there's been some criticisms of how he designs the run game. Is that something you're concerned about? And how do you think that will fit in with what Stoutland brings to the table offensively?
Yeah, and that's one of the big questions about, with Kellen Moore is what's he going to do with the running game? People focus on the passing game for good reasons. That's primarily why he was brought here, to fix the pass game, but what's he going to do with the run game? I think if I were to give my best guess, I think it's going to be a good joint effort between Stout and Kellen Moore. I think what they've done kind of complement each other. They do different things, but I think in a way that's a good thing. With Stout, I love what Stout does, and we all know how great it is at coaching the offensive line, and what he has been able to do over the past several years in the run game has been great. I would love to see, though, more outside zone. I've been saying that for years. More outside zone, more counter, stuff like that. And that's what Kellen Moore brings to the table. And, he has experience designing those types of runs. So I think the blend of both of them is what we're going to see. And I think that's a good thing. And, whatever deficiencies Kellen Moore had in the run game aspect of his offenses, I think Stoutland will more than make up for it. So I think it's going to be a good marriage between the two. I don't think one is going to be solely in charge over the other. I think it's a joint effort. So I'm excited to see it, because I would hope that we're going to see a little bit more under center, some bootleg, but in to make that happen, you have to have those run concepts under center. So you're talking about outside zone, talking about a little bit more counter, talking about some pin pull. So I think those will be implemented a little bit more in this season.
All right, let's go to a couple comments, then we'll get to our next question. Jake says, "What's up?" To you from YouTube. Mr. Crockpot wants to know if it is football season yet. Man, we are trying desperately to hang on and get to football season. We've got some love for Brian Dawkins coming in from Anthony on YouTube, and Pete says he's a sponge right now, just soaking this up. So let's keep going here, talking about the running game with Charles Maranan. You guys go give him a follow on Twitter at Chucks Maranan if you are not. Johnny, I'm going to throw this one to you first, because we've touched on this briefly before, but we didn't dive into it too much. You think about a team like the 49ers, because we mentioned them earlier, and they have Deebo Samuel, and he's a receiver, but they design plays for him running out of the backfield. And they've got Christian McCaffrey, who is a running back, but they send him on that shuffle motion. They run him on choice routes and things a lot. They run him on, almost full route tree. Why are we seeing more running back wide receiver hybrids like that? What do you think the schematic advantage of having guys like that is? And do you think we're going to see that be like the next wave of evolution that starts to take over the league?
Yeah, firstly, I feel like Pete as well there. It's probably the quietest I've been in about 10 minutes on a podcast ever. I now have my reason to go back and watch the Eagles UDFA running back as well, which is nice. Yeah, like in true style of this podcast, I did very little research about this. And now as I'm looking at the questions, I'm thinking about it myself. I guess from a very simple point of view, there's a few things that I can see as really obvious, and then we'll throw it around and see what you two think as well. I think the main benefit of having a running back who can split out wide is it's a little bit like what I say with 12 personnel. You have to actually be good at it. So when I talk about 12 personnel, like I say, it doesn't matter if the second tight end can't actually block or run routes. So I think you have to have a running back who can actually run real wide receiver routes. And that's not easy, because if you've been brought up as a running back, you're running a lot of like check downs, a lot of shallows. You're not running proper routes. You're not facing contact of a line of scrimmage. So the first thing is, it's not just as simple as saying go and stand in that position, because then teams don't worry about it. So I think before you talk about anything, one of the first things I look for when scouting the positions is I want to see actual reps where they're lined up outside, because being a good route runner as a running back is very different to being a good route runner as a wide receiver. Totally different position, totally different timings of play, etc., etc. So essentially, I think there's a few, and these are just the first things that came to my mind very briefly. And then, as I said, you may also have something to add to it, both of you. I think the number one is it's quite nice whether to get a matchup in terms of declaring man or zone. So if you stick a running back outside and a team leaves a corner outside, you can quite often guess they're probably going to stick in zone. Because if they're going to match up man coverage, you'll probably see that cornerback stay with a wide receiver one, especially if you do something like put a running back outside and then move AJ Brown into the slot, or your wide receiver one to the slot and the outside cornerback doesn't follow him. That suggests you're going to get zone coverage. So it can help you declare coverage pre-snap. The matchups are obvious. If they are playing man coverage, well, I don't know, 90% of the time, I guess you're going to be lined up with a linebacker. And that's why we're seeing the linebacker evolve to more of these athletes that are lighter, because they have to handle guys like Christian McCaffrey in space. So I think that's a huge benefit, is that you can essentially get matchups everywhere on the field. I was thinking about this as well, but running backs are obviously extremely good with the football in their hands. And that means yards after catch. You get a massive advantage there. Throwing like a bubble screen to a running back who's split out as a slot receiver is probably going to be better than throwing a bubble screen to Quez Watkins or wide receivers of that nature who are better down the field. So you get the added advantage of yards after the catch. They are like the three main areas that I sort of, without going on too much, that I was thinking about. Shane, you've been asking questions. I'll throw this one to you first before we let Charles add. Do you think there's anything I've obviously missed there about like the schematic advantage? They're sort of the big three that came to me immediately.
Yeah, I mean, to me, we've talked about this before, that people tend to overcomplicate the game of football. And sometimes there's just some really easy binary choices that teams make that dictate what you do. And so if you're an offense, you think specifically of like the 49ers and what they can do with Christian McCaffrey. If they put Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle on the field, that's 11 personnel, right? And so you want to play nickel. But then all of a sudden, if we motion Christian McCaffrey out into the slot and he can actually run routes, you still have to cover him with a linebacker. And so if you have a running back that can beat linebackers running routes, it's such an advantage, because now what do you naturally have to do as a defense if you're getting beat by that? You've got to take a linebacker off the field and put either a safety or a cornerback in there. And now you're light in the box with a team that has a really good run game and can run downhill. And so I think the biggest thing is it just messes with the personnel the defense can put on the field. And we talk about it with RPOs, right? You read the guy and you just make him wrong. If he steps up to stop the run, you throw it over his head. If he stays back, you've got advantage in the running game. Offenses can also do that with running backs that can run routes. Do you want to match us with a linebacker for our running back? We're going to put him on the perimeter and see if he can run with a route downfield. And if you don't do that, we're going to run into a light box. And so I think it just generates another favorable matchup, no matter what the defense does for the offense. So that's my thought, at least. Charles, what would you add into that? And kind of, do you see this being the direction that football's going to head as we get more of these hybrid athletes in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, you guys pretty much hit on all the the main stuff. Just to expand on it, like what you said, Johnny, was 100% accurate. When you flexing a running back out wide is one thing. Having them actually run routes, legit wide receiver routes, and being good at it is another. And I one of my biggest pet peeves when evaluating running backs is when I see someone say, "Oh yeah, this running back is a good receiver out of the backfield." If you're a running back who can't catch out of the backfield running into the flat, then you shouldn't be on the field. Like that's a simple catch and throw. It should be a simple catch for a running back. That doesn't tell me anything. If you want to get, for me at least, if you want me to give you an evaluation to say that you are a really good receiver as a running back, you have to be able to show that the route running acumen at different levels of the field, and you have to be able to show me the hands. You have to be able to say, hey, like, I can catch away from my body and transition quickly from receiver to runner, because that's what I'm looking for. If you are running a slant route and you catch it with your hands and be able to turn upfield really quickly, as opposed to someone who is going to leap up and catch with his body and give me no yak, that makes a huge difference. I'm always looking for that when I'm scouting running back. So being able to actually run routes and be an actual receiver out there is different. Like that's so I it's always my pet peeve when people say, oh, he's a good receiver because he can catch in a flat. Like no, that doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell me anything. And it's all about the mismatches, right? It's even dating back to Marshall Faulk, and then the guy that I mentioned that I love is Brian Westbrook. And it's funny because Ted Nguyen of The Athletic the other night, he posted 2 clips of Westbrook talking about how he was deadly as a mismatch on receiving routes against linebackers. And I think back then when Westbrook played and when Faulk played, and even if you want to go further back, guys like them, they were just ahead of their time because defenses didn't know yet. Personnel, linebackers, safeties, they didn't have that skill set to come and match with these running backs like Faulk and Westbrook. Nowadays, you've seen the shift of like, okay, we need to be able to match up with them, but there's still mismatches that you can exploit as an offense, and being able to have a running back that can be an actual receiver gives you that flexibility to now move move them along the line, move them along the formation, but then also have different types of routes. So it is really like very interesting. I think we're going to continue to see that line between positions become even blurrier now as we continue to move forward with the game.
Yeah, so we talk a little bit about the future of the running back position. I'm going to skip a question in our order, and I'll come back to it later. But as this becomes more and more deadly, as guys like Kyle Shanahan figure out how to use this and weaponize it more and more, do you think we'll start to see a shift to like some of your bigger wide receivers playing more running back, but also being used as receiver? And yet we get to the contract aspect of it where running backs aren't paid as well as wide receivers. And, we can talk about the Christian McCaffrey contract, and he got this market setting deal, and there's still 25 receivers that are paid more than him. And, like 20 of them are less valuable to their team than Christian McCaffrey. Are we going to see a resistance from some of these high caliber athletes of doing that? I mean, we saw Deebo Samuel say he wanted less carries a few years ago because wearing down his body and stuff like that. So how do you think that balances out? And, do you think running backs are still underpaid? Do you think we'll see that pay scale shift as they become more weaponized and they have these more skill sets? How do you see that playing out over the next few years in the league?
Oh, that's the loaded question, right? I remember, was it a year or two ago, when the running backs had during the offseason, they had their like little get together to kind of like go against all the notion that the running backs shouldn't be paid. So that's a big question. It's a huge topic. It's loaded, and I don't want to spend another half hour talking about it. But what I will say is, because of the influx of talent at running back, every year in the draft, we see a number of good running backs. I don't think that's going to end. I think we're always going to have good running backs come in and, be in somewhat of a good, keep that supply in the league up. Because of that, I think that I don't think in a way that the contracts will ever be what they were before. That's the big question, right? Will they ever get fully paid like how they were 20 plus years ago? I don't think it's ever going to that. Do I think there'll be some type of bounce back? I think we're starting to see it now. I think we're starting to see a little bit of it now where, okay, you're not going to pay them $4 or $5 million, but maybe a little bit more, right? So I think we're seeing a little bit of it recuperating, which is a good sign. I think that when it comes to the league as a whole, though, it's two things. Well, I'll summarize in one thing. I think that it goes just beyond running backs, and I think it comes to, will the league ever pay players based on their impact over their position? And I will go beyond running back, and I'll give the example of Look what Travis Kelce is making. All right. Compare his contract and his salary as one of the best weapons in the whole league to what an average wide receiver is making. And tell me that there isn't a unfairness there. Unfairness there with Travis Kelce. But because he's tight end, he's going to get paid less, right? So that's the thing. When it comes to running backs, I'm never going to say like, oh, pay them big second contracts, as a whole. I think the only exceptions are you an elite running back that transcends the norm of what just a good or solid running back brings to the table? If you are that person, if you're a CMC, if you are a Saquon Barkley like we saw, or are you a Bijan Robinson who has that type of potential? Those are the exceptions. Those are the ones where I'm saying they are running backs who their teams can win because of. And if you're that type of player, you deserve to be paid regardless of what your position is. Regardless. So that's always been my thing. Pay elite players. If they're a running back, but they're elite, pay them because they impact your team still to a point where they can carry your offense for you. So in a nutshell, that's where I think it is.
Yeah, to your point, receivers that have a higher average annual value than Travis Kelce include guys like Jerry Jeudy, Christian Kirk, Deontay Johnson, Chris Godwin, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, and none of those guys are even close to more impactful for their team.
Exactly.
Than Travis Kelce. And so, Johnny, I want to get your thoughts on this. And also, there's a cyclical nature to the league. 10 years ago, everything was about stacking the box, being +1 in the box. You think about Jim Schwartz and his style of defense. And now a couple of years ago, Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow take over the league and defenses start to get lighter and faster, and they shift to light boxes and split field safeties. And you see teams need to run the ball more. And I'm curious if either of you guys think that we'll ever get back to a point in time where defenses have swung too far in the other direction, getting lighter, faster, better at coverage. And you see receiver values start to drop a little bit and running back values start to come up, and those sort of, not that they're ever going to flip or meet in the middle, but get closer. Johnny, do you think that we have that future in the NFL, or do you think just the wide open passing attacks are here to stay?
Yeah, I think we already are. I think you can argue that was Jonathan Gannon's downfall. I think you go back to the Super Bowl and Isaiah Pacheco consistently running for 4.5, 5 yards a carry. I think that's what essentially killed us, sadly, in that Super Bowl. I think I'm sort of on the fence when it comes to running back contract. Full disclosure, about 5 years ago, I used to be a guy who was like, don't pay anyone. Just simply do not pay anyone. Draft them every 4 years. It sounds horrible. Run them into the ground. Not very pro player, I know. But basically, if you want to look at it with a real analytics hat on, that was my opinion. Now I've shifted to basically what Charles said, where now I am of the opinion that you pay elite backs. But I don't count like I wouldn't have paid DeAndre Swift. We had that discussion. I wouldn't pay Miles Sanders. Like, I'm talking pay the elite of the elite of the elite. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the thing about running backs are only one of them can essentially carry it on any one play. And most of the time, backups are not on the field. And there's 32 teams. So as long as you get a good amount of running backs every year, you don't need to pay them. Whereas receivers are different because you could be playing 3, 4, 5 every single given week, meaningful snaps, sometimes on the same play. So I think it's a tricky one. The way I would phrase it is I think the running game is coming back, and I think it's massively coming back. And I think if you look at the best offenses the past few years, they almost all have a consistent run game. I mean, you look at the Chiefs who have won it multiple times. Yes, they've got obviously an elite quarterback, but they also have a very, very diverse and strong run game under Andy Reid. I think the question is, I think you can argue, and this is my personal opinion, that running game is coming back. I don't think that necessarily means that running backs are going to earn what they deserve. I think we're going to get into a minority. And I'd see, to be honest, I'm not even sure. You look at people like Josh Jacobs, I look at his contracts, I'm not sure he's worth it. Like, I think I'm talking the top 4, top 5. I think you mentioned Bijan, you're talking Barkley, you're talking
McCaffrey,
Christian McCaffrey, and there's not many others. Like, obviously, I'm not listing off everyone here, but I think there's only a few. But I think you also can't underestimate how important elite running back is. Like, you look at Gibbs with the Lions, and that was earlier than I'd have taken him. I think that was earlier than most people would have taken him. But oh my goodness, when I watch them, he's unbelievable. Like, he is a complete home run threat every single time he touches the ball. It's almost absurd how good he is in limited touches. So when I see guys like Henry Ruggs and John Ross and these electric wide receivers going in the first round who basically excel on minimal touches, why the hell can't Gibbs go early first round? No, he might not be a 25 carry type of player every game, but do you really need that? Saying that, I don't know if I'd pay him in 4 years either. I have a really nasty outlook on running backs. It almost pains me to say, but I would draft and I'd run them into the ground and then I'd probably recycle them. And I think the reason why I'm okay with the Barkley deal is because I think he's that good. I think Charles mentioned the point. At the end of the day, running games are still more about offensive line and scheme than they are about the back themselves, sadly. And that will always be the case. So I would rather invest in an offensive line and have a really good run scheme in general. I think mobile quarterbacks can do a huge amount for the running game as well. So unfortunately, running backs aren't the only part of a run game that matters. And that means that unless you're giving me like a Saquon Barkley, a Bijan Robinson, a Christian McCaffrey, I'm not going to pay you. So it's sad because I don't think they deserve it. And I don't really know what the NFL can do about it either. Because whilst there's only 32 teams, and as Charles mentioned, you can find good running backs all the time. There's lots of good day 3 running backs that come out. So it's a really tricky one, but that's sort of where I am. And it's a hard debate though, because it's quite depressing to talk about in some ways as someone who really likes running game, but that's sort of where I am currently.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that real quick is you talk about how it's when it comes to the running game, it's more about the offensive line, and it's so the running back is so dependent on the line in front of them. That's 100% true, and I think that for me, ever since and you can say it's the influence of watching Brian Westbrook. To me, an elite running back is someone who can impact the game in both the run and the pass game. That's what makes them elite. It's because if you can't impact the game on the ground, you can still impact it as a receiver, as a blocker, like doing all those other things. That's what makes you so valuable to a team, to be able to do those things. So if you are someone who isn't multidimensional and can't contribute in the pass game as a receiver, what are you going to do? That's where your value is going to be diminished because of your dependency on the offensive line. So that's where I always look for, can you catch the ball? Because that's what's going to separate you from everyone else.
Another guy that it'll be interesting to have the discussion about in a few years, because he was just a rookie last year, but it's Devon Achane. He has the potential to be one of those game-changing running backs and multi-facets of the game. And of course, there's obviously concerns about 188-pound speed back being able to hold up to 4 years in the NFL. So he's got to get there first, but he's another one that I think we could talk about potentially in that McCaffrey type game changer mold with his speed, and as long as he's able to stay healthy. But let's go to a few comments here. We've got Mr. Crockpot asking what the shelf life is of an elite running back. It's not very long, so he can't fault teams for not investing too much into the position. And he says basically every team should be investing in the running back position on day 2 about every year. And that's something I wouldn't do it every year, but every year, every other year, I would definitely want to spend a day 2 or a day 3 pick on that. Anthony asked about Stoutland and Moore and how that's going to blend. And we did mention that a little bit earlier, but I think Stoutland's probably still going to run that running game, but they'll probably be a little bit more of an inside zone. And then we've got one last comment here coming in on YouTube from Kawan. Says, the bad news is that running backs are even worse at pass pro coming out of college now than ever. And that is one of the biggest things. I feel like that's what I constantly talk about when I do running back shows in the lead up to the draft is, he's a good runner, but he can't pass protect, so he can't play on third downs. And it's an unfortunate reality that it is worse and worse, it seems like, every year. Charles, do you feel like that watching that? Is that just a misnomer that I'm bringing to the table, or do you feel like you've seen that over the last few years?
No, I think that coming out of college, it's true. I mean, I think that for some reason you're seeing colleges not put an emphasis on pass protection when it comes to running backs. I mean, we do see some that come out and they're really great at it right off the bat. But what I will add to that is, just because they're not polished yet coming out of college doesn't mean they don't have the potential to be great at it. Because when I'm watching a running back in college in pass pro, I'm looking more so, okay, is the will and the want there? And do they have a good baseline of technique and aggressiveness? Like, for example, Blake Corum, stoutly built, short. He doesn't have that technique, but the will and the want is there. So with the right coaching, he's someone who can be a pretty good pass protector. And that's the thing is, do they have those traits to be able to be developed? And so when I grade a running back prospect, I say like, oh, they're bad in pass pro, I always have to preface it and further add context of, hey, like they need the coaching, but the potential is there. Or do I say like they just shy away? They have no desire at all to want to get in there and get, muck it up with the blitzers. And that to me will be a red flag. But there are things you can look at with running back prospects where you can see something to work with.
So we've talked about the elite running backs and how there's obviously not 32 of them. There's maybe 3, 4, 5 in the league at a given time that you would pay. So if you don't have one of those guys, do you think it's worth it to go out and pursue at a more reasonable contract, a guy like a DeAndre Swift, that he's your feature back? He's going to get, the bulk of your carries. Or is it better to spread that around and go for the more running back by committee approach? Which would be your preference? You're the GM, you're building the squad. Saquon's not here. He's not available. How would you approach building out a running back room in 2024?
Are we including contracts in it?
Yes. Yeah, let's do it.
Yes. If I'm including contracts, I'm going to always lean toward the draft prospects. I'm getting and building, drafting guys. We just talked about it. Like, the youth is there. They're cheap. You can find one almost every year. And if you keep drafting, you'll be able to build a good stable. So like if I'm looking at contracts, I'm going to prefer that. Now, if you can find a lead back that's a rookie, like for example, this past draft, I think that a guy like Jonathan Brooks is lead back like type. He screams lead back if healthy. Jonathan Brooks, they drafted him in day 2. He's my lead guy. All right, he's that. So always going to prefer that. So it all depends on the contracts. Go for the cheaper options. But if we're not including contracts, I always preferred having a lead guy that can do a bit of everything. That's my preference, because if I have a guy who can be there on all 3 downs, I contribute that way. I like knowing that I can rely on him. But I'm not totally against a committee. It's just it's situation based.
All right. Johnny, how about you? Do you want to pursue that like second tier foundational back, or do you want to rotate guys through in a committee? How would you approach it?
In true fashion, I am almost identical. So I don't know why, like my favorite, I don't really have a reason why. I just like the same guy getting a lot of snaps. And I know it's the fantasy guy in me. I feel like for an offense, just like being in sync, I like seeing the same running back out there. I think it makes me feel better in pass protection. I think it's a little bit more unpredictable for the defense as well, because you can do a lot with, sometimes you have backs that only come in on certain situations. And I think it can get a little bit predictable. The problem is if I don't have one that's really good, then I'm just fully rotating. Like I've mentioned it too earlier on, I'm not signing DeAndre Swift. I'm not signing a Miles Sanders. I'm basically going full committee and annoying all the fantasy players like myself, because you can't predict. So it's really tricky, because sometimes I feel like there are really good running backs like Aaron Jones who don't get enough snaps as they should, because he's not quote unquote a foundational back because of his size. But then every time I see AJ Dillon out there, you feel like he's just wasting Aaron Jones snaps. But you could also argue that the Packers, until they weirdly got rid of him, were doing a good job keeping Aaron Jones fresh. So we don't know a lot of these things because his body seems to hold up. Me personally, I would take an Aaron Jones, run him into the ground in 3 or 4 years, and then go and find myself another Aaron Jones in the 3rd or 4th round. So my dream is to have a foundational back that I can basically run everything through. But I think because there's so few of them, being realistic, and there's a comment that coming in again about what happens if that guy gets injured, then I think it makes sense to be a little bit more running back by committee. So what the Eagles have done this year is basically they've got a foundational back. If he doesn't play, they're going to use a running back by committee. And I don't really mind that approach at all. Just personally, I like having one guy on the field all the time. I think it's hard to explain why. I think it just makes the offense a bit more consistent, and it makes everything a little bit more in sync. I think sometimes you can lose the flow as a runner as well. And I think a lot of athletes talk about this. You hear announcers say like running with a hot hand. I think sometimes you get backs that grow into a game. They almost get better as the game goes on. And sometimes just giving people 1 or 2, 3 or 4 carries a game isn't really that easy to get into any sort of rhythm. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm very much on the by committee side of that equation. If I can't
I knew you
have,
would be. I knew you would be.
If I can't have, and I remember playing Madden like a decade ago, and it annoyed me that you could just give a guy like 40 carries every game, and he never got hurt and he never got tired. And I just think there's a lot of value in 2 things. One, like we mentioned, injury. If I don't have the Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, I don't want to build the whole offense off of that guy and suddenly he goes down in week 12 in a key divisional game and I got to bring in the backup that has 4 carries this year. But also I think it helps keep those guys fresh. If I'm getting you out of the game and I'm letting you stand on the sideline and catch your breath and it's not like these professional athletes can't be in shape enough to handle 30 carries in one game, but as hits accumulate over a season and over the duration of a 3-4 year contract, I very much like the idea of that rotation, of knowing situations. I don't need my lead back out there in a 3-score game in the fourth quarter and really ramping up the guy that I'm got more confidence in those key games. And as I get into December and January. So I would definitely fall a little bit on that by committee side, not necessarily because of contract, but more so just for efficiency and usage until that guy's on the last year of his deal. Then give him 30 carries a game, run him into the ground. That's fine with me.
Yeah, we're horrible people, Shane, aren't we? Yeah, the NFLPA would not enjoy us. I was always like that with the Cowboys. I thought they played the DeMarco Murray thing perfectly. Everyone was sad that he left them. And I was like, they did it to a T. They ran him into the ground. And then they almost did it again with Zeke. And then they brought him back because they screwed up the whole position. So
and bonus
points.
Always
get it right twice.
Bonus points. They were like, hey, go sign with the Eagles after we run you into the ground and take their money.
Yeah. I mean, to expand on that, even like it's going kind of back to the contract thing. Like, you know, when I defend running backs and say, like, you know, I want the top guys to get paid, like, it's not me even saying, like, I think that, before I lose my train of thought. Yeah. I think that, like, I don't blame the coaches or the GMs. Like, this is how the contracts, right, are structured, the rookie contracts for running backs. Like, run them into the ground. Like, do that. Like, get the most out of them for cheap. That is not their fault. The system is as it is. So take advantage of that by all means. If players want change in how the running backs are being used, especially early on in the career, you got to do something about that pay scale then, or like do something where there's incentives, bonuses for certain marks, or like, you know, rearrange something with the position and how it's paid early on. Do something like that, but that's not the fault of a team running the running back full workload when they can. That's business. That's the game. If you have it there, then take advantage of it. So I completely agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that about exhausts the questions that I had that I wanted to pick your brain at. Johnny, do you have anything that you want to throw out here that we didn't get to?
Is this before I play my wonderful game and put Charles on the spot, or is this anything else?
Oh, yes. I forgot about that. Go ahead.
Wow. Well, it's a good thing you forgot about it, Shane, because I'm going to do the terrible co-hosting and totally ignore Shane for the next minute or two. So for listeners, I have given Charles no context to this. So this will be a little bit of fun. And Mr. Crockpot actually asked earlier on what guys we liked earlier. So basically, a little bit of private joke that I won't spend too long expanding. But those of you who follow me and Charles on Twitter will basically know that every time Charles tweets anything about a running back, I swear I have the same guy. Like, I have the same opinion. And I'm not kidding with this, because I always quote tweet my own tweets from like 6-7 years ago. So this began with like Tyrone Tracy. I told you that you hadn't watched him yet, and I said, I think you should go and watch him. I think you'll really like him. And now all I do is see you tweet about Tyrone Tracy. Trey Sermon was someone that Shane knows that I loved. And then all I see is popping up my timeline is Charles, a big Trey Sermon fan. And then it got a bit ridiculous. Like, we like the same guys. And the other day you shared your love for Kareem Hunt as a prospect as well. And I was like, this is weird now. We like the exact same guys. Like, Kareem Hunt was my guy. And I found the tweet going back to me saying that I picked him up in all my dynasty leagues. So basically what I've done is walking home in preparation for this podcast, I loaded up all of my draft guides on Excel since 2015, because I'm old and I've done this for way too long. And I basically went through and had guys that I had above consensus. So players that I would say inverted commas are my guys. And I think I've actually scouted the running back position pretty well the past 10 years, but I've got some horrible misses in there. Don't get me wrong. Some of them, I'm going to throw you on the spot, Charles. And basically, all I'm going to say is I'm going to tell you a name of the player that I like. And basically, the point of this game was to check if me and Charles are actually the same person when it comes to running back. And also the listeners can hear a little bit about our background on a few running backs over the past 10 years, if you're wondering sort of like the profile we kind of like. So basically, I'm not going to spend long on it because we've gone on about running back for nearly an hour anyway. So I'm going to give you the name of the guy and the year and sort of where I ranked him. You don't need to say anything else. You could basically just tell me, do you agree? Do you disagree? And if you want to throw out like a statement, like whether you love him or whether you really liked him or whether you fundamentally disagree, then go for it. Shane, you're not included, but if you desperately have something you want to say, feel free to pop in as well.
Fair enough.
So I feel like me and Shane know that we see the NFL very similarly at this point. So we're going to start 2022, and those of you listening also, I wonder where. Let me know in the comments where you had these guys. So my absolute guy, I had a couple of guys, but actually I've put 2022, and I'm now thinking, was this might have been 2023? I think 2022 was after. So Zach Charbonnet was my guy in that draft class. I had him as a late first, early second. Agree or disagree?
I disagreed on that one. Yeah.
Right, there we go. See, we're not the same person. Zach Charbonnet was like fully my guy. Like properly all in. When the Seahawks took him, I was gutted. Going back to 22, I had two guys that I was massively above consensus. And I think I'm mixed results so far. Kenneth Walker, I had as the best runner in the entire class over Breece Hall.
I don't know how we do this.
And I had Rashad White as an early third round guy. And I'm putting you on the spot. So if you didn't watch these guys as well, or you can't remember, this is pure on the spot, guys.
So White, I was lower on. I will say that because I thought White was just like a speed player. Which my projection on him has found out to be pretty true. He's not a good runner, but in space as a receiver, he's really good.
Yeah, he can't run.
But you loving Kenneth Walker, that's another one, man. Kenneth Walker, but before Saquon Barkley, is my favorite running back in the league right now. I was one of the minority in where I had Kenneth Walker slightly above Breece Hall too. Kenneth Walker's ability to, and this is the comparison I put out there when I was talking to Matt Waldman on my show about it. Kenneth Walker is like a character in the Matrix where he sees everything go slow-mo and he reacts so much faster than everyone. When you see his vision from first level to second level to third level, and his poise and composure to react to early penetration and to oncoming defenders, I don't know if there's a better running back in the league who has that ability. The problem with his obviously is still vision. He still bounces stuff a little bit prematurely, but when it comes to pure running talent and that ability to create yards on his own and force missed tackles, it's just out of this world. I am super high on Kenneth Walker. I love Kenneth Walker. So, yeah, we agree on him.
Can we just talk about the fact that this is a man who has less than 1,000 Twitter followers? I've given him no names at all, and I asked for a sentence, and he's just given you a minute on Kenneth Walker off the top of his head. And I promise you, I've got a list that I made half an hour ago. Right, that was not a sentence, but it was very impressive. And Kenneth Walker, I sort of still. That's why I hate Pete Carroll, because I hate them both being on the Seahawks, because I love Charbonnet and I love Kenneth Walker. So I can't win. Right, now I'm going to really put you on the spot, because some of these names are a little niche. So here's one for you. One of my guys that I think I got horribly wrong, Michael Carter in 2021. I was a big fan of him before the Jets drafted him. Agree, disagree?
So where did you have him? How did you grade
I had him like early fourth. Like I thought he was going to be like a solid rotational piece, and he hasn't.
So I agree with you. I thought Michael Carter was going to be like, I think my comp for him back then was Gio Bernard. Like I really liked his ability as a third down type of guy. And I'm surprised he hasn't panned out. I liked Carter too, so I agree with you on him.
Right, fair enough. So we're similar there. Cam Akers in 2020, he was my running back 4. I had him above DeAndre Swift. Were you a Cam Akers fan as well?
I was. Cam Akers, like that draft, those, what was it, 4 to 5 guys, I had so much fun evaluating. Cam Akers to me was the guy where because his offensive line was so bad in college, like it's hard to look at like his production and behind him. But when you watch him, I thought the physical ability was there to where I think in my transition summary, I said, it wouldn't surprise me if he ended up being the best in this class because of his ability to just create. And he had a low ceiling, but a low floor, but a high ceiling for me, like a low, a high risk, high reward type of prospect when it came to all those top running back prospects that draft. So yeah, I was a Cam Akers guy too. Yeah.
Right, number one, we're quite similar. I think we're getting a trend into the kind of players we like. Number two, you need to go and find your transition document and tweet it out. And if you just remembered what you said on Cam Akers' running back transition document, then number one, it's even more mental than I thought you were about running backs, but also incredibly impressive. If someone asked me for my Cam Akers scouting report from 4 years ago, I would have no clue. We've already mentioned Kareem Hunt, so I had him as my running back, I think 4 or 5. That was a really good draft class, though. But I had him as a round 2 guy. I don't know. I know he went later, and we mentioned how much we liked him. I'd like my probably biggest success of all time was I had Christian McCaffrey as my running back 1. I had him above Fournette. Were you a big CMC fan when he came out as well?
See, with CMC, I was, but not. I didn't see him as an early round 1 guy. I liked him better than Fournette, but I think he was, for me, I think I had him similarly graded to Kareem Hunt, so I liked them. I liked them both. What I was concerned with CMC with was he wasn't that great of an interior runner, and with his build, I was concerned. And I think early on in his career we saw that, but then he bulked up and he got so much better running inside. So he fixed that. But yeah, I really liked CMC. But I remember when the talk was, oh, Eagles are going to take him at like 14, I got a little bit concerned. I think my grade on him was like a late first, if I remember correctly. So that's how I saw CMC.
Fair enough. Yes, I have a feeling that you like a slightly bigger. I think we both do. I think we prefer foundational backs. So I'm interested in these two actually. If you can remember, we're going back now, listeners. If you're deep in this podcast for 56 minutes, you're a football junkie like us. I had Jordan Howard as an absolute steal. I love Jordan Howard. When he signed with the Eagles, I was so happy. Did you like Jordan Howard coming out? Did you even watch Jordan Howard coming out? We're going back to 2016 now. He was my guy.
Yeah, I mean, this was before Scouting Academy, so I didn't have like a structured, way to eval running backs. But Jordan Howard, I think, is the one we will probably disagree on the most. At peak, I saw Jordan Howard as a complimentary, early down runner. His production his rookie year surprised me, but when he came to the Eagles, I know I have a lot of people that were upset with me because I tweeted something about Jordan Howard. But when he came to the Eagles, I know a lot of people were like, "Oh yeah, he's the running back of the future. He's the franchise running back now for the next several years." I was someone who just didn't see that ability. I was just like, he doesn't contribute on passing downs. Past few years, his production has declined each year, and to me, if you have him as a complement to a finesse guy, which at the time was Miles Sanders, I was like, if you had them as a 1-2 punch, then that's great. But anything beyond that for Howard, I was kind of out on. So a lot of people see me, especially at A2D, a lot of people saw me as the Howard hater, when really I was just I just don't see him as a featured back. That's all. That's all I'm saying. So
we're not the exact same guy, Shane. We've proven because I'll embarrass myself now. I did have Jordan Howard above Derrick Henry. So I'd love to know why I did that, because I'm struggling to think about. I was looking at my rankings on the way home today, and I was thinking neither of them can catch. They're both big guys who run the ball, but Derrick Henry's just bigger and faster and better. So I'd love to know why. I go back to myself in 8 years ago and wonder why I had Jordan Howard above Derrick Henry.
Was it the injury concerns? I feel like
let's say that. Let's say that. And I'm going to end with you said you weren't scouting here. Shane, were you scouting at all in 2015, or am I football sick to go back to 2015?
No, I wasn't.
All right, just me. So I'm possibly the only sad enough one here.
I still remember.
I still
remember, guys.
So this is my favorite. These are literally my favorite draft class ever, because these two guys, I think I fell in love with more than anyone else. I think my favorite prospect ever was Todd Gurley. Like, I think more than Bijan, maybe more than Barkley. Todd Gurley was like, to me, is like how a running back should run the ball, just full on everything on every single play. And then my other guy was Eagles' favorite. Jay Ajayi was my running back too.
Ooh.
I was such a big Jay Ajayi fan.
Yes.
So going back to 2015, Gurley and Ajayi, can you remember at all watching those guys? Because to me, the way I see the position, I'm guessing you really like them. Because I think we like those like 220, 225 backs who can do a little bit of everything and run incredibly hard. So what did you think about those two guys? Am I right or am I wrong?
Yeah, Gurley was running back 1 that year for me. I remember I was like, oh yeah, he's the top guy. He's no doubt. So I really like Gurley. It's just I hated how his career ended so short. Hated seeing that. But with Ajayi, I love J Train too. Like he was a guy that like I saw when it comes to power backs, I need to be able to see a baseline of like at least good feet, because if you're a power back just going to run straight, you don't offer anything to me. But if you're a running back who has good enough feet to pick and choose his holes, then you offer something that's great. I mean, look at LeGarrette Blount, look at like Marshawn Lynch. Their feet are really good for a power back. So that's what I saw in Jay Ajayi is like, this guy has contact balance out the wazoo, but his feet are good because of his soccer background. So like I really liked him too. When it comes to like my mold and my type, which everyone has said like I have a type, but my friends are like, for one of my friends I've known for a long time, he knew it since I started. My type is, if you want to look for my type, it's pretty much like a Brian Westbrook type, where short and compact, multi-dimensional and versatile. That's the baseline of what I'm looking for. Can you do everything? And are you on the shorter and more compact end? Because that way you can take on contact more. And if you're shorter, you can hide behind your offensive line and not be seen. So that's my type. But then like I always try to, over the past several years, I've also tried to be more accepting and more expand my horizons, in a way, because I want to be able to appreciate other molds. I know one of the other guys I really liked a few years ago, I think it was 2020 draft, was Ramondre Stevenson. He was probably one of my guys that draft class because I saw him as a Najee Harris, a poor man's Najee Harris. Big guy, broke a lot of tackles, but the feet were there. So like I liked Ramondre a lot. So that's where I go with running backs is, you have to have the vision and durability. That's like the baseline traits you have to have. You have to have vision and durability. But beyond that, are you durable? Are you multidimensional and versatile? And can you force missed tackles? Can you create on your own, whether it be with finesse or power? Can you do one of the others? Because if things are going to break down in front of you, if your offensive line is not good, God knows you're going to have to create yards for yourself. So can you do that? So that's pretty much the 4 things I look at mainly when I look at running backs.
Man, that is a hell of a lot of running back knowledge. I feel like, what was the comment earlier on? I'm a sponge. There's nothing more I enjoy than talking running back. So that was awesome. The fact you can bring up scouting reports from like Jay Ajayi's soccer background is is awesome. We said off air, we'll definitely do no more than 40 minutes. It's the off season, and in true on the Shane Page style, we have gone over an hour. But yeah, that was awesome. I think people are going to really enjoy that. That was just basically a chance for me to run some names by you to see if we have more of a type. I think I'm into a slightly bigger back. Like you can probably tell, I'm probably more into maybe more of a foundational back. But I think we are quite similar in a number of different ways. Shane, do you want to do the official ending? Anything else you want to say, as we have once again broken the hour barrier that we always say we're not going to do? Anything else you want to add, Shane, after that?
Yeah, I'll get us out of here. My biggest running back scouting regret is Kyron Williams. Kyron Williams was my running back 1 in 2022, but I was a little concerned about his speed. And then he showed up to the combine and ran a 4.65 40, and I dropped him like all the way to running back 5. And then the year he had last year, I was like, man, that was my guy. And I chickened out because of his 40 time. And so now I just ignore that for running backs. But I was so mad about that one. I'll rapid fire a couple comments here. Mr. Crockpot wants to know what happened with Rashad Penny. I'm pretty sure it's been confirmed it was a Space Jam situation. The space aliens put their hands on the football and Rashad Penny's speed went away. So
yeah, he just collapsed. He just collapsed.
Yeah.
There was nothing there. There was nothing there.
And then Kwan asked about Joe Mixon. He was polarizing. I think, if I recall correctly, most of the polarization around Joe Mixon was off the field related. So
he was above. I remember this. He was above Fournette for me. He was alongside Christian McCaffrey. I think he's one of the most talented backs that I've ever scouted. He was unfortunately just an idiot off the field. So that's basically the only reason. I remember Eagles Twitter. If you were on Eagles Twitter back in the day, there was a big discussion about Mixon in the second and whether the Eagles should have taken him. It was huge. And it was almost one of those things I don't like commenting on because it comes down to things that we didn't know about. As a talent, of course, you would have taken him. And it's been proven right. Of course, he was one of the most talented running backs to ever come out. He was polarizing purely because of off-the-field stuff. It wasn't to do with on the field.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to about do it for this episode of On the Shane Page. Charles, thanks for coming on to the show. Tell the people where they can find you and what all you've got going on right now.
I appreciate it, guys. Seriously. You can find me on Twitter at Chucks Maranan. I have other socials. I'm on Instagram too, but I don't do a lot of football stuff on my Instagram. It's really just personal stuff. So, but you can follow me there too. But mainly for football takes, it's on Twitter at Chucks Maranan. I am part of A2D Radio. We do a lot of different sports, but my show on there is Eagles Talk. We are on every Monday night for the offseason. It's 9:00. For the season, it might be pushed ahead so we can accommodate for the Monday Night Football games. But every Monday I do that, and then during the season, I also do short YouTube shows with my boss, Mr. Tom Arnone, on Saturday nights on YouTube. So we do NFL talk as well. That's where you can find me and find all my content, and all my scouting reports are on Twitter too. So if you want to look for them, they're there too.
All right. You guys be sure and give Charles a follow on Twitter. Johnny and I will take it as a personal offense if I check Charles's Twitter in a couple days and he hasn't shut up and follower account. So Pinpull Network listeners, you guys band together, give the man a follow. He won't disappoint you come Eagles season. Johnny, do you have any final thoughts you need to throw out before we get out of here?
No, you just stole them from the Where's My Mouth, Shane. I was going to say, if anyone's listened to this and not realised the knowledge this man has when it comes to running back position, then there's nothing else I can do for you. So, I like the fact you mentioned the scouting reports because, basically they're all on Twitter. So you can always go back and search for Charles's old reports. So if you want to know about any particular players, that's what I've always done. And we always have lots of good discussion on there. So roll on the actual NFL season when we can talk about the position again. But this was awesome. This was a good way to fill the time. So thank you.
All right. Absolutely. Thank you guys for joining us for this episode. We will be back next week to watch UDFAs unless I can convince Johnny that we should do something else. But until then, you guys have a good week. We'll catch you next week for another episode of On the Shane Page.